So welcome back to Let's Think Digital. We're back here again on the conference floor, and we're continuing our exploration of the Estonian model of digital transformation, and really happy to have Ville with us, who's joining us from Finland, actually, across the way from Estonia, but is the Chief Executive Officer of the Nordic Institute for Interoperability Solutions. And I think importantly, as part of that, you are responsible for taking the X-Road model, which is, Estonia's kind of backbone for their digital government solution, and helping other governments around the world be able to implement this. So we're really glad to have you, because we hear about X-Road a lot. Would love to dive into it a bit. And so maybe wondering if, just to start, you could share a little bit about your organization, your mission, and the type of work that you do.
Yeah, so we are an institute established by Estonia, Finland, back in 2017. And the idea is to have a non-profit organization for jointly developing digital government solutions that again help our member countries to provide excellent digital services. So we are a kind of digital public infrastructure factory, and X-Road is our flagship product, of course. And even to our members are 3 governments, namely Estonia, Finland, and Iceland. X-Road is currently deployed in total of 25 countries worldwide. So it's really widely deployed digital public infrastructure today.
So maybe just, for listeners who aren't familiar with it, can you explain a little bit about what X-Road actually is?
Yeah, so X-Road is a centrally managed distributed data exchange solution, which provides you with the software that enables you to set up a national data ecosystem, which can involve all of the society, including the private sector, the public sector. Usually it's a data ecosystem facilitated by public administration, but it's essential to have also the private sector as part of the ecosystem to get the full benefits of X-Road. So a solution for building a data ecosystem for easy and effective data sharing securely.
Right, and I understand security is a big part of it, right? It's kind of ensuring the security of that data, and that that the system, from my understanding, is it's never really been compromised, right? It's been able to withstand a lot of cyber attacks over the years.
As far as I know, it has never been compromised as a system. So of course there might be some independent information systems part of the ecosystem which could be target to some attacks, but to say it would be compromised or anything really be put down, I don't think that's ever happened with X-Road.
Right.
So it has been up and running since 2001, and I guess it has been really tested in practice.
Because it is, I've seen some diagrams before of kind of the infrastructure of X-Road, and so my understanding is, as you mentioned, you have public sector and private sector who can all be together to share data. So you could use your digital identity for doing your banking, or you could use it to vote in elections. But if I understand right, each of those different databases essentially cryptographically is kind of secure in its own piece, so that even if one part of it were to get breached in a way, it doesn't get access to the entire system.
Well, X-Road is distributed, so it means that every organization sets up its own access point component, which is technically speaking a security server in X-Road. And through the security server, they can access technically all of the other services in the ecosystem, but this technical access does not provide any access to data yet.
Right.
So the data exchange parties always agree upon the data exchange between each other, and the data exchange also takes place between the 2 security servers of those organizations. So there is no central component as a kind of single point of failure or anything like that, which would be in a risk. It has central components for managing the ecosystem, but data never flows through the central components, and that's what makes X-Road secure.
Okay. And when people hear about distributed systems, these days people talk a lot about distributed ledgers and blockchain. Now, does X-Road use blockchain, or is it a different type of technology for distributed systems?
It doesn't use blockchain, and I wouldn't call it a distributed ledger either. And we actually have 2 blog posts already from 2018 in which these myths are busted.
Okay.
So, because it has commonly popped up in the news that X-Road would be a blockchain solution, but it's not. So,
right, and I've heard this before too, and I didn't think that it was.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll find those blog posts and put them in the notes for the show, so people can take a look at that if they're interested. Okay, so myth bust, no blockchain, as part of X-Road, but it is still a distributed system, but not a distributed ledger.
Yeah, just a distributed system, and what is most important to understand about X-Road is that it's not a data exchange or data sharing solution only, but the main idea is to form an ecosystem. So that's the real goal, that you actually have a large ecosystem of different participants who can continuously benefit of being already connected and to utilize, produce and consume different services within the ecosystem.
Right. And so your institute, as you said, is a nonprofit organization.
Yes.
So you've got a nonprofit model, and you're sharing X-Road essentially with different governments around the world. A couple of questions about kind of how this model works, which I find fascinating. So do you do actual implementation with them? Will you, if a country came to you and said, we want to implement X-Road within our systems, do you provide the technical advice and assistance to them to be able to do that?
We don't actually do that. So we are just a software development organization.
Right.
So we develop the X-Road core. And the countries that have implemented or will implement X-Road, they usually do it by themselves. And they might find some help from so-called X-Road technology partners. So we have a program for companies that have experience in X-Road.
Okay.
And it's really useful for any government willing to explore X-Road or to implement it, that you already have existing resources. Besides that, we have released lots of materials for anyone interested in X-Road. Like we have a free online academy for learning the fundamentals of X-Road, and then specific courses for server administrators and different roles involved in the maintenance and implementations of the ecosystem model. So we are never part of the implementations, but we just release the software as open source. It's fully free, no license fees. Anyone can just take it and implement it. Also free for Canada and any of the states here. So we are really looking forward to that.
So, and that was one of my questions that I wanted to confirm. So it's an open source model.
Yes.
X-Road is developed as open
MIT
source.
license.
And was that, because I know initially the Estonian government, I think, had private sector companies who helped to initially build X-Road, but then was it the Estonian government that then provided it as an open source resource?
I would actually say that in Estonia it was an excellent cooperation between the public and the private sector, how X-Road was started. So initiated by the public sector, but already from the beginning joined by the private sector in this effort. So I think the model of cooperation is a good example of how it actually should work. And it was open sourced, I think, in 2014, when Estonia and Finland started joint development of X-Road, and that actually happened before our institute was founded.
Okay.
So they had two teams working, one in Estonia and one in Finland, one working in a waterfall model and one working in Scrum. So you can imagine that it was a nightmare to try to merge all that stuff.
Yes.
So that's why we exist today.
Okay, and so Estonia and Finland were the two original countries then that used X-Road and were developing it.
Well, it was invented in Estonia already in 2001, so Estonia started with it alone, and Finland joined the cooperation in 2014 approximately.
But I think it's a really interesting model, because this question, I'm a big believer in open source technology. We talk about it on the podcast a lot. But one of the challenges is, how do you maintain open source if it's purely a volunteer-driven effort? And this idea of, if I can put it this way, it sounds like your institute essentially acts as a custodian for the X-Road, right? And helps to make sure that it can survive and evolve, and others are able to adapt it.
Well, I would put it in the way that open source doesn't necessarily mean that it would be just community-based development of it. We are actually funded by the governments, and we have a development team of 7 currently working on the X-Road core. So majority of X-Road development is carried by us, financed by the governments, and not by the X-Road community. But anyone can participate in the development, anyone can contribute. But in systems like X-Road, when we talk about quite a large digital public infrastructure, it's not a favorite of any developer, and neither it's a favorite of any hacker, because it requires lots of learning before you actually get to do things.
Exactly.
And that's why we really rely on the funding we currently have from the governments. And the governments are paying a membership fee to the institute annually. And the membership fee is used to organize a public procurement for the development of X-Road. So this operating model is quite unique. 3 governments organizing one joint public procurement for development of jointly used software.
Absolutely. Well, and this idea that having governments actually spend money to maintain open source software, to be honest, it doesn't happen a lot here, I think, in Canada or North America. But I think I've heard a couple of cases of this in Europe now, and some other places in the world where this is starting. And I think it's a really interesting model to be thinking about in terms of how we could apply that here. So you mentioned X-Road now has been adopted in 25 different countries, which is actually more than I thought. That's a lot more. It must have been growing a lot in the last few years. I'm curious, what has that process looked like? Like, is it relatively easy for countries to be able to implement it, or is there a fair bit of work to adapt X-Road to a specific country's systems?
The growth has really been huge, and it has been very fast as well. I mean, we have tried to follow when X-Road is being deployed around the world, but sometimes it has even taken some days or months or weeks for us to figure out where it actually has been deployed. We just hear some rumors, and then we see, now this country has made it. And the way how they do it is quite independently. Mm-hmm. So what it takes from the countries to deploy, some have done it fully by themselves without any external help. Some have used companies like the X-Road Technology Partners, which we have listed in the X-Road website. We sometimes receive questions, and actually we also receive requests for support from some countries, but we cannot provide it widely. So what we usually do is that we forward these questions to the X-Road Technology Partners that should actually provide it as consultancy, because we have a really small team. Mm-hmm. I sometimes laugh that we are the world's smallest institute with 5 employees, so we are not able to do much for the countries, but we try to help as much as we can, and mainly to release materials which allow the countries to study X-Road and get to understand all the nitty-gritties.
And I imagine too, as you start getting more and more countries who are using it, they can also help support to each other, right? In terms of their peer experience.
That's true. It's really happening nicely, because when we started with X-Road, the actual development started actually in 2018 by us. And at that time, we had a user community which consisted of 80 people from Estonia and Finland. Mm-hmm. And today, the X-Road community has over 4,200 people from 150 plus countries. Wow. So it's really a large community, and what we see every day is that people from different countries are supporting each other nicely. So the peer-to-peer support is really important for us and for them.
Absolutely. And I'm sure some of the listeners would be interested. Can you share some examples of countries that have now adopted X-Road?
Well, for example, majority of Latin American countries today have it. So it's really going fast there. Also in Asia, we have some implementations like Cambodia. Mm-hmm. They have their CamDX. In Europe, it's currently Estonia, Finland, Iceland, the Faroe Islands. We are looking forward also to Quebec to have it. So we have just signed or about to sign a partnership agreement with Quebec.
Okay, very interesting.
And just this week we received their partnership application to NIS. So I think it's nice to have them on board and cooperate also in other parts of digital government, not only X-Road, but that's something we are starting with. So hopefully we'll see X-Road soon in Canada as well.
That's great. Well, you heard it here first. The Quebec government may be one of the first X-Road partners in Canada. So that'll be fantastic.
And of course we are hoping to get more, and we are open to discuss with any government interested in X-Road and really to get started with that. So
that's great. And if people are looking for more information about X-Road and your institution, what's the best place for them to look for more information?
Yes, so the X-Road website is xroad.global. In that you can find actually every possible source of information about X-Road worth checking.
Okay, great. Well, listen, thank you so much for taking a few minutes and sharing us a little bit more details. I think, X-Road is one of these things we hear about a lot, but it's great to talk to the people who are actually involved in helping it to spread around the world. And exciting news that we may see X-Road being deployed here in Canada very soon.
Great. Thanks for the discussion.
Thank you.